Check it out.
Well, you didn't even check it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Madison Hayes. I'm an intern for the Pat Conroy Literary Center. I'm also a senior interdisciplinary studies major at the University of South Carolina, Beaufort, and that means I will basically be living in a box on the street. All for good cause, naturally. Welcome again to our 4th annual Pat Conroy Literary Festival. We want to extend our thanks to our festival's many sponsors and partners, including our host this evening, the Technical College of the Low Country. TCL has been the host of many Conroy Center programs, including our inaugural Camp Conroy series, our Visiting Writers series, and all 3 years of our Low Country Book Club convention. So thank you to TLC for collaborating with the Conroy Center on our literary festival this year and making possible tonight's conversation with writers and conservationists Mary Alice Monroe and Sally R. Murphy. They will be introduced by our moderator, Dr. Ellen Malfris, USCB's writer in residence. Dr. Malfris is the author of the novel Untying the Moon and also a contributor to our Prince of Scribes, the Writers Remember Pat Conroy. Her fiction, poetry, and essays have appeared in Southern Literary Journal, Review of Contemporary Fiction, the Haight-Ashbury Literary Journal, and the anthology Essence of Beaufort and the Low Country. She is also the deputy director of the annual Pat Conroy Literary Festival. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ellen Malfris.
Thank you, Madison. I'm so glad you guys are here. I'm not going to take a great deal of time going into the many accolades of these amazing 2 women, but I will touch briefly on some of the high spots. Mary Alice Monroe is no stranger to Beaufort, South Carolina, no stranger to the Low Country. She is no stranger to the wide world with her 24 novels. The latest 24th, I don't know if you realize that we have, this is where we are. And along the way of those many wonderful books, Mary Alice has stacked up an award or 2 to take up some space on her walls, including the South Carolina Literary Hall of Fame in 2018, the South Carolina Center for Writing Book Award in 2017, the Florida Book Award for Excellence in Writing, the International Award for Green Fiction, that was for The Butterfly's Daughter, one of my favorites, the Henry Berg Award for Children's Fiction for Turtle Summer. She is a 2-time winner of the National People's Choice Award, and I think probably many of you know that Beach House was made into a Hallmark Hall of Fame movie. Remember Andy McDowell playing Lovey? And one of the things that makes Mary Alice most proud amongst all these awards is the fact that she has been a turtle lady for 20 years. Since 1999, she has been walking the beaches, doing the work that was inspired by the Turtle Queen, who will also take the stage in a moment, Sally R. Murphy, the woman who single-handedly made a difference in the history of sea turtles on planet Earth. That's a pretty special thing. Some of you know about turtle excluder devices, TEDs, we call them. Some of you have been around Beaufort or the Low Country or shrimping industry in general to know that TEDs weren't such a happy thought for shrimpers back in the day. This is the woman who brought information. This is the scientist who brought the facts to the table, who brought TEDs that shrimpers could live with. This is the woman who did the research, did the trench work. This is the woman who, in many ways, is single-handedly responsible for the fact that now, instead of our sea turtles being so critically endangered, we have a healthy, happy sea turtle population in our seas. Did she check that off after her 30 years when she retired in 2006? Oh no, she has continued to lobby for all things conservation, particularly marine conservation, particularly in the low country of South Carolina where she makes her home. It is my great pleasure to invite to the stage Mary Alice Monroe and Sally Murphy. So you two were no strangers to one another. How did you meet?
Well, as coordinator for the Sea Turtle Project for the state of South Carolina, it was my job to train the volunteers, give them permits, and then check up on them to make sure they were following the
We're all a little
guidelines.
afraid of you.
No. So Mary Alice was one of the volunteers that would come to the April training session at Fort Johnson, and also I would see her out on the beach for on-site training.
Yeah, but you didn't tell the fun part is when we were out patrolling or following the tracks and working with the nests. Every once in a while, a plane would come over, and we'd know it was Sally. We'd all run to the shore and start to wave, and she would tip the wing. It was like such a big thing when Sally Murphy came by. But we really, you were an icon in our eyes even back then. We knew that you were the queen bee.
When was that? Approximately.
Well, I started in 1999, and Sally told me 1995 was when our teams started. But you started the first efforts in what?
I began my research on the beaches in 1977 up in Georgetown at the Yawkey Wildlife Center. And those aerial surveys I started in 1980.
So long before the turtle teams actually were active on the beach.
Sea life you were no stranger to sea life though. Tell us about your childhood on the Vernon River.
I grew up in a little hamlet about 10 miles south of Savannah called Rosedew. There were maybe a dozen houses there. A few of us had docks. When my parents cleared the lot and built this little cinder block cabin, it wasn't many people out there. So I grew up there as a river rat, like a lot of kids that grew up in the marshes.
So do you think that childhood experience had a big effect on you? You talk in the book about this imprinting you for a path that led you to this chair today.
I think subconsciously it did, because as a kid you're just having fun. You're not thinking about it.
Sure.
But there were subtle hints from my parents about always throwing back the female crabs and always throwing back the little crabs, so we'd have more crabs. So that sort of thing was ingrained early on.
It had to have made such a difference for you, not just as a trained scientist, but as a person who knew the river, knew
Loved
the
it.
coast, had it in her bones.
Well, I did my graduate work at the Baruch Institute at the University of South Carolina, and I would go to their lab facility at Hobcaw, Barony, to get my specimens. And to be out on the marsh again after being in Columbia.
But I gotta tell you, that's one of the things I loved about reading your memoir, was you really talked about that being in Columbia and missing the marsh and missing the water. That's why I thought your memoir was so beautiful, because you gave that history of from childhood to, and I think you do explain a little bit about why that history of yours brought you to the career you chose.
I think maybe like little turtle hatchlings, we do imprint on where we grew up. Because I have a friend that grew up in Chattanooga, and she has lived down here all her adult life, but when she goes to Chattanooga, she's going home. And when she sees those mountains, she says, I'm home. And that's the way I feel about seeing a flat horizon and the salt marsh.
I write about that a lot. I think 80% of all my books is about someone going home.
Yes, it's place. And Sally's book, when you get it and read it, you will see it is, yes, it is a book about this woman's story, this woman who has done these amazing things for turtles on planet Earth. It's also a story about place. It's about her, this idyllic childhood growing up on the Vernon River, and her subsequent love for, cherishing, doing something to protect these marshlands that we all love so much. It reminds us of why this place is so valuable. It's a story of place. It's a story of a woman in a profession at a time when there were 0 female DNR people in
That's what I
her
thought was interesting. Was that
position.
it's a reflection of a time when women who did hit the ceiling, the glass ceiling, and what it took. Although you seem to have never seen that ceiling, but it exists for a lot of people, and I think you do talk about it in your book.
I kind of just ignored the ceiling.
Busted on
I know. I was there.
I was
was
too
there.
busy doing stuff.
But it was there.
Mary
Oh,
Alice,
it was there. I didn't care.
just busted through.
I know I had stuff to do.
Mary Alice, were there things, when you look back on your childhood, can you now see there were the seeds that have sprouted along the
In a
path?
different way. When I was really young, I'm one of 10 children. And so I look at Delia's faces, oh my God, 10's cesarean section, so how's that? My mom's in medical books. And when you live with that many brothers and sisters and you're one of the eldest, your job as one of the eldest children is to help with the little ones. And so I remember from the earliest days that we would make up stories and sing songs to put the kids to bed and take care of them. And when we got a little older, there's a lot of art in the family. Some play musical instruments. A lot of my brothers and sisters paint. I wrote stories, a couple of us do. So we put on our own shows. This was before TV. I just heard today that the average 10-year-old spends 5 hours a day on screen time. And I'm horrified by that because when we were kids, popping tar bubbles was a big thrill. And so we made up shows and plays and musicals. And I believed in fairies, and I might still. So I think that sense of wonder was so great. But then when I got older and married my husband, very young, his family has that farm in Vermont, and that's when we would learn the names of all the children, and me included, would write the names of all the trees and the plants, and we had this big board, and we pin it up, and all the bird sightings, and I learned and taught my children the names of things, so that they would become familiar with. It's not just a big bird in the sky, no, that's a red-tailed hawk. So by doing that, you become closer to nature. So all that was in my stories. If you read my early books, it's there. But it wasn't until I moved to South Carolina permanently and became a member of the turtle team. Everything changed. I knew from having lived in cities like Washington, D.C. and seeing the firsthand devastation of wildlife for buildings, I knew that there was a naivete here about losing what was so precious, the Low Country. And that's when and the turtles in particular. And I knew that I had a smaller audience then, but I wanted to write a story that would inform my readers without proselytizing, like a nonfiction, through the power of story, which I think Delia does so well. And it was through that The Beach House was written. And it was successful because I feel that if you can get the readers to fall in love with the sense of place and the animal, then they care. And if they care, they take care. And with that success at the Beach House, it sort of set me on my path.
There's another writer I can think of. I'm trying to call his name. I'm almost Pat.
Okay. Yeah, I read his books.
Conroy.
They kind of did something.
He did.
His beach music. Oh, are we going to tell that story?
The what?
The beach music story?
You can tell it.
Then you tell me. You tell your version. and I'll tell mine. I loved all Pat. Pat was an inspiration. He was, before he knew it, and before he was a friend, he was a teacher to me, just his writings. But my favorite was Beach Music. I think Prince of Tides, in my opinion, is his opus. But Beach Music is my favorite, and there's turtles in there. And if you remember, there was, his mother was what we referred to on the team as naughty turtle ladies. Some of the early, you know what I'm talking about. Some of the early turtle ladies, and I was very fortunate to interview a lot of them when I did work for the Beach House, 20 years ago. Most of them are gone now. But they did what they could, and that was Lucy in Beach Music, the mother.
Yeah, there were turtle ladies before I came on the scene.
And they had good hearts, but they made a lot of mistakes, which because they didn't know better, right?
And they knew, these people knew that. After I came on the scene,
After you came on the
they
scene.
knew that.
After you came on the scene. Well, that was the thing. And in Beach Music, if y'all remember, because probably y'all read it, he had created a character, Jane, who carried heat when she walked the beach, which of course, I don't think you ever carried a gun, did you? So, okay, years later, the aquarium, I was on the board of the aquarium, still am, and we had the very first gala where we gave awards. And I was the MC, and it was kind of roughing it that year. We made a lot of mistakes, but Pat was the first award winner for Legacy Award. And he, I don't know if you know this, was on the very first board of the South Carolina Aquarium. And you won our very first award for achievement, wasn't that it? So I remember it for me, this was really fun because I introduced and gave Pat his award. And then I introduced you, and I introduced her as the woman that was vilified by Pat in his book. And now you tell the rest.
Well, I also had that story in my remarks at the aquarium. And I looked over at him. I didn't say vilify. I just said,
maybe I did.
I just said, we both have crossed paths and there's just some weird karma that keeps bringing us together. And he did get that kind of deer in the headlight look. But later on at the 70th birthday party at a luncheon, he was there and Cassandra was there with Patty Callahan and you were...
We gave the luncheon.
You gave the luncheon. So then you start talking about our...
I told that story.
Yeah, Patty says, tell us about the turtle lady, and you did.
And I did, but then tell him what happened. So I like to embarrass her by making her stand up, and she did. Then tell him what Pat said, which is so great.
Well, it was over and people were filing out, and I went to find him because I had never really met him before. And so I walked up to him, and he said, Jane! And I said, no, Sally. And he said, but you're my Jane.
Beautiful story. I love that story. And that's so Pat.
Story.
Yeah, I know. And it's so Pat. His graciousness. Love.
So in 2007, at the awards where Mary Alice emceed and Pat got an award, Sally got an award, the News and Courier newspaper was also awarded by the aquarium. And in her remarks, I want to read you just two sentences here, three. That these are Sally's words about Pat Conroy. We both care deeply about the South Carolina coast and its creatures and will fight like crazy for them. It's just that our weapons are different. He uses art, I use science.
Isn't that beautiful?
And in the trenches she was, fighting the good fight. Tell us a little bit about what it was like in the trenches in those early days, Sally.
Watching your rear view mirror a lot.
How so?
I was getting threatening phone calls from shrimpers who were calling the house at night, threatening to sue me for the economic loss of their business, etc., etc. I had a technician who worked with me who was my height, my coloration. She had a brown station wagon just like mine. And I told her, you know, be careful, because you never know.
And they hung you in effigy, which I think is pretty frightening. Those were, I was at the meeting, and we were trying to figure out which one that was, but we got word that we had to be with her to help, you know, stand up on her side, and there were shrimpers there. I love the shrimpers now. They adopted the TEDs, and I wrote a book about shrimpers because it was their turn. But at that particular meeting, there was real anger because they thought you were going to take away their livelihood, because their livelihood was becoming less and less each year as imports were increasing. Friends don't let friends eat imported shrimp.
Right.
You explained it to them in a way that was not emotional and gave the facts that in fact this would not impact their harvest. Do you remember that? I think they listened to you
Well,
that
I
day.
went to so many of those meetings. The first one was a real lesson, because it was in Mount Pleasant, it was hot, it was in the evening. A few people had already imbibed it before they got there. And I was just giving the numbers. This is how many turtles we've had counted dead so far. And Junior Magwood rose.
Junior, oh my God.
And he's quite profane. And I was getting madder because he was saying shrimpers don't kill turtles. And I was about to lose it when Dr. Joseph, who was then head of the Marine Division, came to my rescue. And he's such a sort of short, stocky man. He had a pipe, and he would say, Junior, now we know shrimpers kill turtles. We're here tonight to try to figure out how to keep shrimpers from killing turtles. I took a lesson from Dr. Joseph to just keep my cool at any future meetings.
You did when I saw you, so that was good.
And there were many of those future meetings. This didn't happen. This wasn't a convince them overnight. It took years and several TED prototypes and lawsuits. And
This was in the mid-1980s, and it took until 2003 to get the right TED in by the federal government.
I think what's important to keep in mind is what you mentioned when we were talking about this earlier, was today when you talk to the new volunteers or people who are just catching on, today turtles are kind of cool. You know, they're the icon of the South Carolina Aquarium. There have been a lot of documentaries about it. But back then, and even in 2000, when I wrote Beach House, the first one, there was no awareness of light disorientation. People weren't talking about it at all. And so I think over the last 20, 30 years, there's an awareness now. But the reason I'm so glad the memoir is written is that new volunteers today still don't even appreciate all the work that went underneath to make it happen. So why the turtles are trending upward today. And what's so cool is 30 years later, and the reason why this series I'm writing still goes, is the interest is there, but also we are seeing changes in the sea turtle population and the relationship that people from locally and people from off have with this iconic mariner, this dinosaur that still comes out of the sea. There's this fascination with this animal that's persevered, or as Thoreau said, is one turtle has seen several Napoleons, which I love that line, especially this year. And I think that it's important for people to know the history and why your memoir is important. And I actually am thrilled when they read my books because they're learning current information while they're reading it through the power of story. And I think that combination is, Sally has read my books, I give her my books, and she looks at it to make sure I got it right. Because I know turtles, but she knows turtles. And I have a whole respect for field work. That's a different arena. And I appreciate, she checks to make sure everything in my book is accurate. And it's been changing this year in particular with climate change. It's definitely making a difference. So our relationship has changed from mentor, well, you still are, always will be, but from mentor, where you were up there and I was a little nervous and afraid of you, to friends. And it's been really beautiful, beautiful.
To now co-conspirators.
To co-conspirators.
One thing I do want to say is you sort of painted like I did this all on my own. Nothing could be farther from the truth. South Carolina was the first state to enact HEB regulations in 1988. And that happened with having friends in high places. I was a little peon trying to get this through an agency that moves at glacial speed. So having Senator John Drummond as an ally, and having, then it was U.S. Congressman Arthur Ravenel as an ally. Those two helped quite a bit. And then these powerful NGOs like the National Wildlife Federation, Environmental Defense Fund, Center for Marine Conservation. The way I was successful, I couldn't have done it on my own in that agency. That bureaucracy would not have responded to me. But when you get these other people pinging on them from the outside and threatening lawsuits for not following the Endangered Species Act, then you get their attention.
We know it takes all those politicians and so on, but had there not been for this woman, the first Marine Turtle Recovery Team in the U.S., she's the co-leader of that, the first sea turtle coordinator for DNR. This is the gal who took the initiative. We were talking about this at lunch. This is, when I read Sally's book, it's a moment in the book that I absolutely loved. It as a story for me, it was one of the climactic moments that early in her career, she got her annual evaluation, so to speak, and there was a section that said that she was lacking in initiative. You know, A+++ on every other, but lacking in initiative. And how I read between the lines is here was this woman in that place, in that time, trying to get to that ceiling to burst through. And she hadn't let her light entirely shine yet. But buddy, all it took was that dude saying, initiative, not so much. And she said, never again. There will never be an evaluation of this gal that does not show initiative. And she took that and ran with it. No one had to talk about showing more initiative to Sally Murphy.